The easiest way to steal $1 billion isn't by breaking into a bank. It's by convincing the world that an innocent man already did it. I learned that lesson on a gray Tuesday morning with grease under my fingernails and exactly $23 left in my checking account. My name is Ethan Carter, and until that day, I thought losing my auto repair shop was the worst thing that could happen to me. Bankruptcy had already taken my business. The bank had taken my tools. Pride had slipped away one unpaid bill at a time. All I had left was a part-time job fixing cars in a rundown garage on the edge of Newark and the promise I'd made to my late father that I would never stop working with my hands. The rain had started before sunrise, drumming against the rusted metal roof, while I replaced a damaged transmission on an old Ford pickup. My coffee had gone cold hours earlier, but I kept drinking it anyway because it was cheaper than buying another cup. Every wrench I turned reminded me that honest work didn't always earn an honest life. Around 10 that morning, a black luxury sedan rolled into the garage. It wasn't the kind of car people like me ever touched. Perfect paint, tinted windows, tires that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A man in an expensive charcoal suit stepped out, handed my manager the keys, and quietly explained that the vehicle needed a routine inspection before being transported to Manhattan. I barely looked at him. Rich people came and went. Their problems were never mine. I spent less than 30 minutes checking the brakes, replacing a worn sensor, and signing the paperwork. The sedan disappeared into the rain, and I went back to fighting with a rusted exhaust bolt. By lunchtime, everything changed. 3 police cruisers pulled into the parking lot so fast their tires splashed water across every service bay. Officers stepped inside, asking for my name before I could even wipe the grease from my hands. My coworkers stared as they placed me in handcuffs. I laughed once because I honestly believed there had been some ridiculous mistake. Then one detective held up a photograph of the same black sedan I'd inspected that morning. According to him, confidential financial records worth billions had vanished from a hidden compartment inside that vehicle, and surveillance footage supposedly showed I was the last person with unrestricted access. I tried to explain exactly what I'd done. I listed every repair, every tool, every minute. No one seemed interested. Outside the garage, cameras were already waiting. Reporters shouted questions before I even reached the patrol car. Someone yelled that I had stolen the biggest corporate secret in American history. Someone else called me a professional thief. My manager wouldn't even meet my eyes. As the cruiser pulled away, I caught one final glimpse of my reflection in the rain-speckled window. I looked exactly like the criminal everyone wanted me to be. Across the street, parked beneath the shadow of an old brick building, a black Rolls-Royce remained perfectly still. A man sat silently behind the tinted glass, watching the entire scene unfold without saying a single word. While the rest of the city celebrated my arrest, he was the only person who seemed to notice that something about the story didn't fit. The holding cell smelled like old concrete, stale coffee, and the quiet disappointment of people who had stopped believing anyone would listen to them. I sat on the cold steel bench, replaying every minute of that morning until the memories blurred together. I had inspected the sedan exactly the way I had inspected thousands of other vehicles. I had opened the hood, checked the diagnostic system, replaced the faulty sensor, and signed the work order. That was all. Yet somewhere between tightening the last bolt and hearing the click of the handcuffs, my ordinary day had become the biggest headline in the country. The detective returned carrying a thick folder and dropped it onto the metal table with enough force to make me flinch. Inside were photographs of the luxury sedan, copies of financial reports, and security images that seemed determined to prove a story I knew was impossible. Every page painted me as a desperate mechanic who had discovered hidden corporate secrets and stolen them for money. I looked at the pictures until my eyes hurt. They showed me walking around the vehicle. They showed me opening the driver's door. They showed me leaning into the cabin while checking the electronic system. None of them showed theft because no theft had ever happened. I tried explaining that a proper inspection required those exact steps, but my words felt smaller every time they left my mouth. By late afternoon, television screens mounted outside the interview room were already broadcasting my face beside words like corporate espionage and financial conspiracy. Experts who had never met me confidently discussed my motives. Commentators wondered how long I had planned the crime. One reporter even called me a criminal mastermind. I almost laughed again because the only thing I had successfully planned in the past 6 months was how to stretch grocery money until Friday. Hours away, inside the back seat of the black Rolls-Royce, Vincent Moretti watched the same news coverage without changing his expression. His driver waited silently while another man in an immaculate navy suit handed Vincent a digital tablet filled with background reports. The file contained my employment history, my bankruptcy records, my tax returns, and every address where I had ever lived. None of it interested him nearly as much as one photograph taken by a traffic camera less than 4 minutes before the police arrived at my garage. Vincent enlarged the image and studied the reflection in the sedan's rear window. It was faint, almost invisible beneath the rain. But another person appeared near the trunk at a moment when every official report insisted the car had been completely unattended. He looked at the timestamp once, then a second time. The numbers did not agree with the prosecution's timeline. He quietly asked for the original files instead of the edited copies released to investigators. Nobody in the vehicle questioned the request because Vincent had built his reputation on noticing details everyone else ignored. As darkness settled over the city, I stared through the narrow window of my cell and wondered whether truth still mattered in a world that had already decided who I was. At that exact moment, a man I had never met closed the tablet on his lap and spoke only 6 calm words. Find out who changed the timeline first. Morning arrived without feeling like a new day. The judge approved my release on bond, but freedom felt strangely smaller than the holding cell I had left behind. Every phone notification carried another headline with my face beside words that no longer sounded real. My landlord left a voicemail reminding me that rent was overdue and gently suggesting that the building did not need more unwanted attention. The garage owner sent a short message saying he could not keep me employed while detectives and reporters kept showing up outside his business. I read it twice before putting my phone back into my pocket. He was not cruel. He was scared. Fear spreads faster than facts. I walked the 6 blocks to my apartment with my head down, hoping no one would recognize me, but hope was becoming an expensive habit. A teenager pointed at me outside a convenience store. 2 strangers whispered while pretending not to stare. A woman pulling groceries across the parking lot tightened her grip on her purse as I passed. None of them knew me. They only knew the version they had seen on television. Inside my apartment, the silence felt heavier than the rain outside. The refrigerator held half a gallon of milk, a carton of eggs, and leftover takeout that should have been thrown away days ago. My mailbox contained unpaid bills and one handwritten envelope from my younger sister, Emily. She lived 3 states away with her husband and had no idea what had happened yet. I could not bring myself to open her letter. I could barely face my own reflection. The only person willing to answer my call was a public defender whose exhausted voice carried more honesty than optimism. She explained that the evidence looked overwhelming, but something about the timeline bothered her. The official report claimed the financial files disappeared while I was inspecting the sedan. Yet the digital inventory listed those same files as successfully verified nearly 8 minutes later at another secure location. She admitted she did not understand how both statements could exist at the same time. Before ending the call, she quietly suggested I speak with a private attorney if I could somehow afford one. I almost smiled at the impossible advice. Meanwhile, 40 miles away, Vincent Moretti stood inside the top floor of an office tower overlooking the Manhattan skyline. His headquarters was unusually quiet as analysts projected surveillance footage across a wall of glass screens. They slowed each recording frame by frame, comparing traffic cameras, parking garage entrances, and toll booth timestamps. Every official copy matched perfectly. Every original recording revealed tiny differences. A delivery van appeared for 6 seconds before disappearing from the edited footage. A maintenance worker walked through one camera angle but vanished from another. None of those details proved my innocence, but together they suggested something far more dangerous than a simple theft. Someone had rewritten reality before investigators ever arrived. Vincent rested one hand against the glass and studied the city below without speaking. Finally, one of his investigators placed a folder on the conference table. The name printed across the top belonged to Richard Harlow, the celebrated chief executive whose company claimed to be the victim of the theft. Vincent opened the folder, scanned the first few pages, and paused at a series of offshore financial transfers completed less than 24 hours before my arrest. He did not look surprised. He looked disappointed. Somewhere between those numbers and my ruined life, a story had been carefully manufactured, and for the first time since the handcuffs closed around my wrists, someone with the power to uncover the truth had finally found the thread that could unravel the entire lie. Sleep became something other people enjoyed. Every night I closed my eyes, I saw flashing cameras, police lights reflecting across rain-soaked pavement, and strangers deciding who I was before I ever opened my mouth. 3 days after my arrest, I walked into the small office of attorney Olivia Brooks carrying nothing except a worn backpack filled with paperwork and the last bit of hope I still owned. Her office overlooked a busy Newark intersection where traffic never seemed to stop. Unlike the polished law firms downtown, her furniture showed years of use, her coffee maker sounded older than I was, and the walls were covered with framed newspaper clippings celebrating victories for people who had almost been forgotten. She did not greet me with sympathy. She greeted me with questions. She wanted every detail about the black sedan, every repair I performed, every conversation I remembered, and every minute of that morning. When I finished, she remained silent for nearly a full minute, studying the inspection report instead of me. Finally, she slid one page across the desk. The work order listed the vehicle identification number correctly, but one electronic authorization code had been entered 17 minutes before the sedan ever arrived at my garage. I stared at the document, reading the numbers over and over until they finally made sense. Someone had approved work that had not happened yet. Olivia leaned back in her chair and quietly said that paperwork almost never predicted the future unless someone had written the ending before the story even began. My stomach tightened. For the first time, I stopped asking whether I had been framed and started wondering how many people had helped build the trap. Across the Hudson River, Vincent Moretti sat alone inside a private conference room while his analysts continued assembling pieces that did not belong together. Financial records, security logs, shipping manifests, and communication reports covered the long walnut table. Every document looked legitimate by itself. Together they formed a pattern that no honest investigation should have ignored. One transfer worth $980 million had moved through 3 international accounts within less than 6 hours of my arrest. Publicly, the money appeared connected to a routine corporate acquisition. Privately, the transaction depended on confidential data that had supposedly disappeared with the files I was accused of stealing. Vincent slowly closed the folder and looked toward the skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He had spent years watching powerful people disguise greed as business, but this scheme felt different. Someone had not simply hidden stolen money. Someone had manufactured a criminal to distract the entire country while nearly $1 billion changed hands unnoticed. One of his investigators entered carrying another envelope recovered from an independent insurance audit. Inside was a maintenance report for the luxury sedan. According to the document, a concealed electronic compartment had never been installed in that vehicle at all. Vincent read the report twice before placing it beside the police evidence. The official investigation claimed I had stolen files from a compartment that, according to the manufacturer's own records, had never existed. He allowed himself the faintest smile, not because the mystery was solved, but because lies always became heavier the longer people carried them. Back in Olivia's office, my phone vibrated with another news alert, declaring investigators had uncovered overwhelming evidence against me. I looked at the headline, then at the impossible timestamp on the inspection form resting between us. Olivia folded her hands across the desk and quietly said the words I had needed to hear since the day everything collapsed. They are not afraid of what you did. They are afraid of what you accidentally saw. The truth did not arrive like lightning. It arrived one overlooked detail at a time until the impossible became the only explanation left standing. Olivia spent the next 2 days buried beneath stacks of financial filings, inspection records, and corporate disclosures while I sat across from her desk, trying to understand how replacing a faulty sensor had somehow destroyed my life. Every few hours she circled another date, another signature, another approval that seemed ordinary until it was compared with something else. By the third evening, she slid a yellow legal pad toward me. Across the top she had written 3 simple words. Follow the money. She pointed to a series of transactions completed within hours of my arrest. Nearly $1 billion had quietly moved between investment firms connected to Richard Harlow's corporation. Publicly, the transfers were explained as part of a strategic merger that immediately caused the company's stock value to surge. Investors celebrated. Business networks praised Harlow as a visionary. Yet every one of those transactions relied on confidential engineering data that was supposedly missing because I had stolen it. I stared at the numbers without speaking. If the information had truly disappeared, the merger could never have happened on schedule. That meant someone already possessed everything they claimed had been stolen. My arrest had not protected stolen files. It had protected a carefully rehearsed story. Across the river, Vincent Moretti received another encrypted report from his investigators. The original manufacturer of the luxury sedan had finally answered a question nobody in law enforcement had bothered to ask. The electronic module that I had replaced during the inspection contained an automatic diagnostic memory. Every time the vehicle started, every system check, every compartment opening, and every electronic command was quietly recorded inside the module itself. Vincent ordered an independent specialist to recover the memory before anyone else could erase it. Several tense hours later, the results appeared on the screen. The hidden compartment investigators kept talking about had never been opened while the vehicle sat inside my garage. Instead, the log revealed it had been remotely accessed nearly 40 minutes before the sedan ever arrived at my workplace. Vincent leaned back in silence. His suspicion had become certainty. I had not interrupted a billion-dollar theft. I had unknowingly repaired the very vehicle used to make the theft appear believable. My inspection created a perfect timeline. My bankruptcy created a believable suspect. My ordinary life became the disguise behind an extraordinary fraud. Olivia's phone rang just before sunset. The caller refused to identify himself but quietly warned her to stop asking questions about Harlow Dynamics if she cared about her career. She thanked him politely, ended the call, and wrote the exact time on her notebook instead of looking frightened. When I asked whether we should be worried, she smiled for the first time since we met. Honest people rarely receive anonymous warnings. People hiding something usually cannot stop themselves. She folded the notebook closed and looked directly at me. You were never the target, Ethan. You were the cover story. Somewhere inside that corporation, someone believed the country would spend months arguing about one bankrupt mechanic while almost $1 billion quietly disappeared forever. They never imagined someone would notice the timeline. They certainly never imagined someone else was already watching them from the shadows. For the first time since my arrest, I woke up without feeling completely defeated. Nothing around me had changed. My apartment was still quiet. My bank account was still nearly empty. The news still treated me like the villain in a story that never belonged to me. But somewhere beyond the headlines, the truth had started moving. I could not see it yet, but I could feel it. Olivia arrived just after 8 carrying 2 cardboard coffee cups and a folder thicker than anything I had seen before. She spread dozens of documents across my tiny kitchen table until there was barely enough room for either of us to sit. Every page connected another piece of the puzzle. Shipping manifests matched financial transfers. Electronic maintenance records matched insurance filings. Internal company emails revealed executives discussing delays that should never have existed if the official investigation had been accurate. None of the evidence alone could destroy the lie. Together, however, they formed something impossible to ignore. Olivia looked exhausted, yet her eyes carried the quiet confidence of someone who had finally found solid ground. She explained that someone inside Harlow Dynamics had coordinated every public statement with remarkable precision. Press releases had been drafted before investigators completed basic interviews. Television appearances had been scheduled before prosecutors officially announced charges. It was almost as if everyone already knew exactly how the story would end. While we assembled timelines inside my apartment, another investigation unfolded far above Manhattan. Vincent Moretti stood inside a private operations room where an enormous digital map displayed financial institutions, logistics companies, and shell corporations connected by glowing lines. His team had spent days tracing every transfer linked to the billion-dollar merger. The deeper they searched, the more one name continued appearing beneath different companies, different signatures, and different jurisdictions. Richard Harlow had carefully hidden his fingerprints behind layers of legal paperwork, but money rarely forgot where it had traveled. One investigator quietly handed Vincent another report recovered from an overseas compliance office. The document confirmed that several corporate officers had secretly resigned weeks before the alleged theft, but continued signing official paperwork afterward through temporary authorization accounts. The timing made no sense unless those resignations had been intentionally concealed until after the merger became irreversible. Vincent slowly closed the folder and spoke with absolute certainty. They are no longer protecting stolen money. They are protecting each other. Instead of confronting anyone directly, he instructed his investigators to quietly deliver certified copies of the financial records to 3 independent regulatory agencies on the same morning. No threats, no public statements, just verified documents arriving at exactly the same time. He understood something many powerful people forgot. Facts become far more dangerous when too many honest people receive them at once. Late that afternoon, Olivia received 3 unexpected phone calls. The first came from an accountant requesting an urgent meeting. The second came from a former executive willing to answer questions under legal protection. The third came from a federal auditor asking where she had obtained financial records that had supposedly never existed. She ended the final call, looked across the table at me, and smiled with quiet satisfaction. The people who built the lie had started making mistakes. Somewhere across the city, executives who had spent weeks speaking with perfect confidence suddenly began calling one another in panic, because the story they had written for the world was beginning to collapse under the weight of its own impossible timeline. The city did not wake up differently that Friday morning, but by noon the story everyone believed had begun falling apart, one verified document at a time. I sat beside Olivia inside a small conference room at the federal courthouse, watching television reporters gather outside through a rain-streaked window. A week earlier, those same cameras had chased me through a parking lot, convinced they had found the face of corporate greed. Now they waited for something else. They just did not know what. Olivia quietly slid another folder toward a federal investigator who had spent the previous 48 hours comparing every financial record we had uncovered with documents received from 3 separate regulatory agencies. None of those agencies knew the others possessed the same evidence until that morning. Their findings matched almost perfectly: the impossible inspection timeline, the altered surveillance footage, the non-existent electronic compartment, the billion-dollar transfers completed before the alleged theft had even become public. One investigator looked up from the documents and slowly removed his glasses. He did not ask me another question. Instead, he asked for Richard Harlow's complete executive authorization history dating back 2 years. That single request told me everything had changed. Across Manhattan, Richard Harlow stood before a room full of investors inside his corporate headquarters, smiling with the confidence that had built his reputation for decades. Behind him, giant presentation screens displayed charts celebrating record profits and a successful merger that financial analysts had praised all week. Then every screen suddenly went black. A technician hurried toward the control booth, while confused voices spread across the room. Seconds later, the displays returned, not with stock prices or quarterly earnings, but with time-stamped maintenance logs, banking records, and certified corporate filings. Every document carried official authentication numbers from independent agencies. Every timeline contradicted the public story that had placed me at the center of the scandal. Silence settled over the ballroom. Nobody shouted. Nobody moved. Investors simply stared as the carefully constructed narrative unraveled before their eyes. Miles away, Vincent Moretti watched the broadcast from his office without celebrating. One of his investigators quietly informed him that several corporate officers had already begun requesting individual legal counsel after reviewing the released records. Vincent nodded once before turning off the television. He had never been interested in public humiliation. He wanted the truth to become impossible to bury. Back at the courthouse, my phone vibrated so often that I finally turned it face down on the table. Reporters who had once declared my guilt were suddenly requesting interviews. Former co-workers sent messages saying they had always believed in me, even though I remembered the silence in their eyes when I was taken away. My landlord apologized for assuming the worst. None of those messages erased what had happened, but they reminded me how quickly public opinion could change when facts finally caught up with assumptions. As evening approached, Olivia received one final email containing the complete forensic analysis of the luxury sedan's electronic system. The report confirmed every detail we had suspected from the beginning. The confidential files had never disappeared inside my garage because they had never been there when the vehicle arrived. I closed my eyes for a long moment, feeling the weight of days that had seemed impossible to survive. When I finally looked back at the television, the headline across every major network had changed. My name was no longer followed by the word suspect. It was followed by another word I had almost forgotten existed: innocent. The official dismissal of every charge against me happened on a bright Monday morning, yet it felt strangely quiet. There were no cheering crowds outside the courthouse, no dramatic speeches, just a judge reading a brief statement acknowledging that newly verified evidence had completely undermined the original investigation. The courtroom emptied almost as quickly as it had filled, leaving behind nothing except the echo of footsteps and a chapter of my life I knew I could never erase. Outside, dozens of reporters waited with microphones raised, hoping for anger, celebration, or revenge. I gave them none of those things. I simply thanked Olivia for believing in facts when belief in me had become unpopular. Then I walked away. My phone continued ringing for hours. Television producers invited me to tell my story. Podcast hosts wanted exclusive interviews. A publishing company even offered to discuss a book. I declined every invitation. For weeks the world had treated my life like entertainment. I had no interest in helping it continue. Instead, I spent the afternoon standing inside the empty building where my old repair shop had once operated. Dust covered the concrete floor. The tool racks were gone. Only faint outlines remained where heavy equipment had stood for years. I ran my hand across an old workbench and smiled despite everything. Machines could always be repaired. People sometimes could too. Across the city, Richard Harlow quietly stepped away from public life, while multiple independent investigations continued reviewing the financial evidence that had surfaced. His company suspended several senior executives, shareholders demanded answers, and business channels that had praised his leadership only days earlier now questioned every decision that had built the celebrated merger. The headlines no longer focused on one bankrupt mechanic. They focused on a system that had almost rewarded deception simply because it looked convincing. High above Manhattan, Vincent Moretti stood alone beside the windows of his office overlooking the skyline. His chief investigator entered carrying a leather envelope containing the final case summary. Every document had been verified. Every timeline had been corrected. Every question Vincent originally asked had finally been answered. The investigator placed another envelope beside it. Inside was the deed to a fully equipped automotive repair building that had quietly become available after a recent foreclosure. Vincent glanced at the address, signed one page without hesitation, and instructed his staff to transfer ownership anonymously. No press release. No public recognition, no explanation. Some debts, he believed, should never appear on paper. 2 weeks later Olivia called and asked me to meet her at an unfamiliar address outside Newark. I almost drove past the building because I assumed it belonged to another business. The paint was fresh. The service bays were spotless. Brand new lifts waited beneath bright overhead lights. A simple envelope rested on the front counter with only my name written across the front. Inside was a property deed, a single key, and one typed sentence. Honest work deserves an honest beginning. There was no signature, no company logo, nothing identifying the person responsible. I looked at Olivia, but she only smiled and admitted she had received the same anonymous instructions that morning. As I stepped outside holding the key in my hand, A familiar black Rolls-Royce rolled quietly through the intersection across the street. It never slowed. The tinted windows never lowered. Within seconds it disappeared into afternoon traffic, leaving behind nothing except the quiet realization that the man who had restored my future had never asked for gratitude, only for the truth to have one final chance to be heard. 6 months later, the sound of an impact wrench echoed through my garage before the sun had fully climbed above the rooftops. That sound had once meant survival. Now it meant something even more valuable. Peace. The new shop had become more than a place to repair cars. It had become a place where people who had been overlooked could start again. Veterans searching for work, young mechanics needing experience, and neighbors who could not always afford expensive repairs found an open door instead of judgment. Every invoice carried one simple promise my father used to repeat: leave people better than you found them. Business slowly returned, not because of the headlines that had briefly made me famous, but because trust is earned one honest job at a time. Olivia stopped by almost every Friday afternoon after court. Sometimes she brought legal advice. Sometimes she brought coffee. Most days we simply laughed about ordinary things that had nothing to do with billion-dollar conspiracies or courtroom victories. Ordinary life, I discovered, was never ordinary after you almost lost it. One crisp autumn morning, a young apprentice asked whether the stories about my arrest had really happened. I looked around the garage before answering. The polished concrete floor, the organized toolboxes, the steady rhythm of customers walking through the front door all felt more real than those painful weeks ever had. I told him the truth. People will sometimes judge you before they know you. That part of life cannot always be controlled. What you can control is whether you give up before the truth has the chance to catch up. He nodded quietly and returned to work without another question. Across Manhattan, Vincent Moretti continued living behind closed doors where public recognition meant very little. The investigations triggered by the evidence had permanently changed corporate oversight policies inside several financial institutions. Independent audits became stricter. Security procedures improved. Quiet reforms spread through boardrooms that would never know the full story behind their existence. Vincent never claimed credit. He never attended interviews or accepted awards. His satisfaction came from knowing that one carefully examined detail had prevented an enormous lie from becoming permanent history. Late one afternoon, nearly a year after everything began, a familiar black Rolls-Royce stopped across the street from my garage while traffic waited at a red light. This time the rear window lowered only a few inches. Vincent looked toward the open service bay where I was helping a father and his teenage son replace worn brake pads on their first family truck. Our eyes met for only a moment. I raised one grease-stained hand in quiet appreciation. He answered with the smallest nod before the light changed and the car disappeared into the flow of the city. We never exchanged names. We never shook hands. We never needed to. Some people change your life with long conversations. Others change it simply by refusing to ignore the truth when everyone else already has. Looking back now, I understand that bankruptcy never truly ruined me. False accusations never truly defined me. Even fear failed to become my future. What nearly destroyed me was how easily the world accepted the first story it heard. And what ultimately saved me was one person willing to ask a single uncomfortable question before reaching a conclusion. If there is one lesson my journey left behind, it is this: truth rarely arrives first. It arrives quietly, patiently, and often long after the crowd has chosen a side. But when it finally walks through the door, no amount of money, influence, or carefully written lies can make an honest life disappear.